Parexel International is a leading clinical research organization. India, no doubt, because of its population, it holds great potential, and the genetic diversity it has, it holds great potential for clinical trials. But how do you deal with the empathy and the poverty situation, and the people are not exploited for that?
Yeah.
How is Parexel India doing for that?
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Meenakshi, and pleasure to be here as well. So just to give you perspective, you're absolutely right. Parexel is one of the global leading clinical research organizations. Not many people know Dr. Meenakshi, but Parexel was the founder of this company, Dr. Joseph van Rickenbach, is actually also called the pioneer of the concept of clinical research. So, so technically you can say the clinical research industry started because of Parexel. It started with the regulatory concept, and then others came in to follow. So I'm talking about a history of more than 35 years of conducting research here intensively with the highest compliance standards when it comes to conducting any studies. One of the things that's very important for this industry, Dr. Meenakshi, is also to understand that whenever you're conducting a study, it's not just about getting a new therapy into the market. It's all about the patient at the end of the line, because you're absolutely right. I think that is very, very critical. If you talk to anybody within Parexel, today, patient centricity is the DNA of every decision that we make. So today, any deviations that we need to make and we need to conduct a study, or any decision that needs to be made to make any changes, the first question that we keep in our mind is, how is this going to impact to the patient at the end of the line?
Yes, yes.
And that's the approach Parexel takes. Now, coming to your specific pointers, you're absolutely right. In India, we are 6,000 people out of the. So India is the largest footprint for Parexel. 35% of Parexel's population sits in this part of the world, which personally we are very proud of. This grew from 30 to 6,000 in the span of last 15 years. And technically everything from cradle to grave, right? From protocol design to protocol execution to biostats, stats programming, medical writing, data management, all of these aspects have been conducted in this part of the world for studies that are being done in India, but also studies that are done globally as well. Somewhere in 2012, 13, I do understand that there were challenges in the industry, not in the industry, but generally in the industry, where there were challenges in terms of patient compliance, patient consent forms, and making sure that the patients were compromised. But this all happened with some of the local non-compliant CROs who didn't understand how the studies were to be done, right? But thanks to the DCGI new 2019 regulations, this is one of the fantastic moves that has happened, that since 2019, these standards of care are actually at par with the US FDA regulations or European FDA regulations today. If you see, this is something which was needed for India, even though India lost a huge opportunity because between 2012 and 2019, a lot of the studies went out of India because of these challenges. The regulations became very stringent, very strong. It was not conducive to bring therapies into the market, and at the end of the day, who lost? The patient lost, because the patient did not have alternative therapies, right? But with these changes in regulations, it has literally changed the way the clinical trial applications are evaluated, the requirements of the ethics committee within 50-kilometer radius, the whole standards of care, even post-clinical trial, are very clearly written now by DCGI from that perspective. So I believe India is back in the game, even though they lost to China and Australia during this process, because many of the studies then pivoted and the patients out there. And having 1.2 billion patient population in this part of the world, definitely the disease burden is pretty high. India is only going to get benefited from that perspective. I personally believe that there is a huge opportunity for India today to not only, and pandemic is a great example. Like during pandemic, you saw a lot of the new COVID therapies that came into India. They were tested, patients in from India were recruited on that perspective. And because of that, new therapies were been able to bring into the market, right? And India has always been a bigger site contributor from, or patient contributor from that perspective. And last but not the least, you touched a very important point, is the diversity piece of it, right? This is something which we have been ignoring quite extensively. It always used to be white skin, blue-eyed population being a part of the study. We don't know how that, but to advocate that, we did two things. One, from an empathy perspective, we have actually launched a patient advocacy group in India. So for the first time in the last and this group came together, we had a half-a-day session with them. All these 15 patients have gone through clinical research in some form or the other, have participated in that. And we took these patients on board as our panelists, and we asked questions like, okay, what is it that we need to do differently to bring more patient participation, whether it is education, whether it is things like that patients who are traveling 200 kilometers just to get to an investigator site. How can we help them get access to that therapy, right? It's not always going to be possible. So this patient advocacy group concept has helped. We have launched 7 versions of this across, and India is one among them to drive that. And last but not the least, we recently launched a white paper on diversity, equity, and inclusion. How do we drive? DEI is not just about a corporate topic. It's not about inclusivity only between male and female within the corporate, but we are talking about gender inclusivity and expansion and diversity from a patient population perspective as well. And we are insisting down and pushing and conversing with our sponsors and FDAs around to include more and more diverse patient population. And India is definitely playing a lead role on that. So sorry, I answered a lot of things in a row, but I thought your question was pretty broad. So I just tried to touch base a couple of topics there.
So what I was just thinking that, as a scientist, when we work in a lab, we initially start with so many compounds, and we start off with bioinformatics studies and try to, look for the docking studies, binding partners, and then probably we come out with one thing. Then again in the lab, we are working and trying to find the efficacy of the drug. After all these, what do we we are working in the lab and what are so-called as preclinical studies. Now a drug, an investigational drug, which we can now say, will go into phases of clinical trials. So what are these trials, and Parexel starts in the lab itself, or its role will start from phase 1 clinical trial?
So you're absolutely right. Parexel doesn't play in the preclinical arena. Where our role starts is the early phase or the phase 1. So we have our own early phase units in Berlin, in Germany, in US, and both East and West Coast in UK. So we start with the phase 1 piece of it, and then we go all the way to phase 2, 3, 4 till the commercialization piece of it. And that includes even health economics outcomes research. It includes regulatory and access commercialization piece of it, market access piece of it. So we take that's when I said, when I talk about cradle to grave, once the efficacy of the molecule is proven into the lab by the sponsor, and the safety is proven, the efficacy is proven, and that's when we take the molecule and then we start with the first patient in from a phase 1 perspective, which is the in hospital with 60, 100 patient population, whatever is there.
And so how is the efficacy and safety of the drug in the lab? How you make sure that it is like completely safe and effective?
So you have to understand that every phase within clinical conduct, whether it is preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, after every part of the study, the sponsors are required to produce data and submit it to the FDAs for their reviews and detailed approval. The ethics committee, the federal drug investigators, everybody who is as a part of this whole stakeholder process evaluates and gives an approval. Till we don't get those approvals from the US FDA or the EU FDA or the respective FDA within our DCGI for that matter in India, we would not be touching that drug and would not be getting into the first patient in at this point of time. So technically there is a very stringent compliant process on that. And that's how we ensure that we first review all the data. We have medical experts on our teams also. They also look at the data, the authenticity of it, the approval certificates that have come in. And then that's when we make a decision that, yes, now we can take this molecule to the patients accordingly.
Okay. So the gold standard for any efficacy and safety is still the FDA, right?
Yes, it's still.
So what about the Indian regulatory authority? It will also?
Yeah, so in that case, it is the DCGI. So depending on where the molecule is developed, Dr. Meenakshi, because if the molecule is not developed in India and if it's been developed by a multinational somewhere else, or then in that case, the first line of approval would come from the US FDA. Now, what happens is you need to do something called as a bridging study before you get a molecule into India. And so one of the challenges in India is, and this is as per the DCGI regulations, they do not allow new molecule to be tested or early phase or phase 1 to be conducted in India. As of now, they are only made certain exceptions. So technically, it's only the phase 2, 3 that happens in India at this point of time, which unfortunately is an irony, because if you look at countries like Australia, China, Australia is probably one of the biggest markets on opportunities in Europe is also where phase 1 studies are conducted, where the regulations are easy, because then in that case, the patient gets an early on access to the drug part of it. But here, unless the molecule is developed by an Indian sponsor, the DCGI would not allow you to conduct a phase 1 trial, and we don't do phase 1 trials in India.
Okay.
Yeah. So for us, the phase 1 trials happen in Berlin, or so if anybody, even Indian sponsors, when they want to do phase 1 trials, we recommend them to do it in Europe or in, so that because the standards in Germany are the highest standards you can see, like compared to anywhere in the world, the German standards are apparently the gold standards in addition to US FDA. Yeah.
Great. That's interesting, in fact.
Yeah.
And so regarding India's potential, if an Indian scientist is developing a drug and gets an FDA approval, then you can do phase 1 also in India.
Yeah, then you can do phase 1 in India, but that also there are a lot of local early phase units, players that are available. We don't have a phase 1 unit in India. That's not the reason. So if the sponsor comes to us, we recommend them the highest standards, which is the European or the US. I said you clean that, and then you can do the phase 2. So, but if it's we Parexel as an organization does not have a phase 1 unit, and we don't do phase 1 here at all in India.
Phase 2 and phase 3 mainly, and phase 4 is with the patients.
And phase 1, there are a lot of good local players in the market. Technically, the Indian sponsors work with them, or many a times the Indian sponsors have their own affiliations with the phase 1s or an offshoot from their own company. That's where they try to conduct the phase 1 as well.
And so in India, we have a lot of natural products and other things getting used. So their efficacy and safety is another questionable question.
It is, right, Dr. Meenakshi, and as I said, for me, I'm a man of science, right, and I have to see factual data before I believe and trust anything. Because at the end of the day, I come back to the same point, Meenakshi. For us, a patient is at the end of the line. Tomorrow, it could be my father, my mother, who would be going through the same treatment. I do not want to make sure, I want to make sure that whatever the medications or the compliance that they're going through is of the highest standards at this point of time. And it could be any of our relatives, right? And that's the mindset we work in Parexel, because it could be any one of us who would be at the end of that line. So
that is the best part of Parexel, which I find. I was just wondering about the empathy and the patient focus. That is more important, the patient focus, because, in India, because of the poverty and other problems, patients or the participants, they could be treated like guinea pigs.
Yeah, but Meenakshi, I think maybe those days of challenges are gone, because I personally believe that this was a thing of the past. Yes, India did have issues somewhere, which is one of the reasons in 2012 or 2013, we lost a huge chunk of the business, because suddenly the DCGI clamped down very heavily, and they made it so strict that it was technically impossible to do. But then now with these regulations, I personally believe that there is a very, very strong compliance adherence process that the DCGI has put in today that will not allow any of the sponsors, when I say sponsors, the pharmaceutical companies, or for that matter, even clinical research organizations, to take advantage of this process. There's a very stringent process. The patient consent forms has to be explained. They have to be multilingual. You have to make sure that the patient understands this before he or she signs on those consent forms. And those procedures are very, very strict.
Is a video consent also taken?
Yeah, video consent is also one of the ways that's considered, but at the end of the day, it has to be a combination of both. Video is considered now. During pandemic, that was our only source of discussion. But having said that, so we put in place something which we call it as risk-based quality monitoring, RBQM. Because previously what happens was the clinical research monitors used to physically go to the investigator site. But with the lockdown that happened, the pandemic did not allow anybody to be visiting the site at all. So technically then all those visits happened virtual. But what happened was, while we were doing that, we said, okay, we need to put in place a risk-based quality monitoring process in place parallelly as well to understand. So once that initial data is collected, we had to re-scrub that data, re-qualify it, and then re-follow it with a physical process later on as well. So we did both at the same time to ensure that we maintain the highest standards of care during this process.
That's really good. That's really great. Amazing. So can you tell me a few examples where these drugs, what Parexel has, a few drugs which are there in the market now?
Honestly, at this point of time, we will not be able to, because we have confidentiality agreements with many of the sponsors. But yes, I can tell you the therapeutic areas, because that will probably give you the direction. So in the last 2 years, we have worked more than 250 plus COVID therapies and vaccines.
Even the COVID therapies.
Yeah, so that's our biggest focus areas are oncology, hematology, immuno-oncology, immunomodulatory therapy, so all this infectious diseases. So those are the areas that we are very, very strong on. Those are the areas where the drugs which have come into the market. To be very honest with you, the top 250 brands today that are available in the market at some point of time have gone through Parexel's clinical research conduct process at this point in time.
Okay, that's amazing. That's really nice. Thank you so much, sir. And it's really heartening to know what Parexel is doing. And in fact, I was looking at your website and I realized it has got the Catalyst Award also, and there's so much of work. So that's amazing.
No, that's interesting.
I know India holds a great potential, and people like you who take care of who have the patient focus, that is, really, really important.
There's so much of potential at this point of time. India is the largest producer of pharma graduates. India is the largest producer of medical graduates. So there's so much of job opportunities in the clinical research arena today across. It's just amazing. And not just medical or pharmacy graduates, but we're talking about biostatisticians, stats programming, data management, pharmacovigilance. They're just the exponential area. The areas are just huge. And then coming to the Catalyst Award also, as I said, this is something which is very, very close to our heart. I personally am a diversity champion for my company here in India as well. We actually launched during this pandemic, one thing that came across to us, Dr. Meenakshi, that when the pandemic hit, unfortunately, the maximum amount of resignation that came was from our women leaders and women employees. And when we tried to dig into this and we asked a few of them as to what is happening, and they said because there's nobody else to take care, they became the primary caretaker for their either father-in-law, mother-in-law, or for child or whatever it is. So unfortunately, between the husband and wife, the wife had to resign. So what we did was, we launched a program called Vaccher, which was technically focused at every new job opportunity that's coming in. Now we are going back to all our women employees who resigned in the last 18 months and asking them, do you want to come back? The first right of refusal is given to them. And that's one of the things that we are doing as a part of this process. And the second thing that we are very proud, Dr. Meenakshi, is the fact that we launched a flexible working arrangement. So we had when the pandemic hit, the day 2, suddenly everything went on a lockdown, right? So all our 5,300 people were made to go online. We gave them all the facilities at the home, including table, chair, monitors, whatever they had to do, and work. And not only that, but we officially launched a flexible working policy that allows them. We did a survey. People chose if they want to now in future want to continue to remain flexible, want to remain mobile, so want to come 2-3 days, 1 day a week, or not come at all. Their choice was given, and 65% of our population chose flexible working at this point of time. Only 30% of the people now want to come back, and we are not forcing anyone to come back to the office to work. So they're all working remotely at this point of time, majority of them. So then that's a part of all our re-excel and return to office or flexible work arrangement, and that's what we're trying to do. So the empathy is not just from a patient, but the empathy comes from within as well.
Employees also within the organization. Exactly. That's great. That's great. And in fact, Parexel in India, I wish you all the best, because it's going to generate so much of employment also, even for our students, doctors, and even biochemistry student, biostatisticians. That's great. Amazing.